He scratched at my door like his life depended on it, but what I found when I opened it chilled me more than the snow ever could. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the relentless whisper of wind brushing across the cabin walls. Snowflakes floated past the window like tiny shards of glass, settling in layers upon layers until the landscape vanished into a white void. I had just settled into my old recliner, wrapped in the soft glow of a flickering fireplace, with a warm mug in hand. The world outside felt distant, safe, until the scratching started. At first it was faint, barely audible over the gusts of wind, a light scrape against the door, then again, more insistent. I paused, straining to listen. Living in a secluded part of Northwood Hills had taught me to ignore the usual creaks and groans of an old wooden home. Wind could mimic footsteps, trees tapped like knuckles. But then came something else, a sound no storm could imitate, a low, desperate whine. It stopped me cold. Setting my mug aside, I rose, barefoot on cold timber floors, and made my way toward the door. Each step came with a mix of hesitation and urgency. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter, clicked it on, and slowly opened the door. The cold hit first, a wall of biting wind and swirling snow. But then I saw him. A German shepherd stood there, or rather collapsed against the threshold. His body was more ice than fur, crusted with snow and visibly trembling. His eyes locked onto mine, and they weren't just scared, they were pleading. "Oh my God," I breathed. Without another thought, I tossed the flashlight aside and knelt down. The dog's legs buckled when he tried to move. He was far too weak. I scooped him up, alarmed by how light he felt, like bones wrapped in damp fur. His body was ice to the touch, and I could barely feel his breath against my neck. "Stay with me, buddy," I muttered, kicking the door shut behind me with my heel. I laid him on the thick rug in front of the fire and ran to grab blankets. Wrapping him tightly, I placed my hands on his sides. His breathing was shallow, barely there. For a few seconds, I feared the worst. Then a twitch, just a small one, ran through his paw. It gave me hope. I thought I had saved him from the storm, but something in his eyes told me this wasn't just a random rescue. I rushed to the kitchen and filled a bowl with lukewarm water, careful not to shock his system with anything too hot. Grabbing an old towel from under the sink, I returned to the fireplace and knelt beside him. His breathing was still shallow, his fur soaked, and his eyes fluttered between consciousness and complete exhaustion. Gently, I began rubbing him down, trying to bring warmth back into his body. His ears twitched again, a good sign. I didn't speak much, just short whispers and murmurs of reassurance, like you would to a frightened child. "You're okay now," I kept telling him, even if I wasn't sure he could hear me. His ribs were sharp against my hands and his fur was tangled with small bits of ice and bramble. This dog had been through more than a snowstorm. As I rubbed warmth into his legs, questions raced through my mind. Where had he come from? How long had he been out there in the blizzard? And more importantly, why my cabin? There were no other homes nearby, no nearby roads, just forest and snow. Outside, the wind still howled like some ancient thing, and the windows trembled under the pressure. But in that moment, the fire crackled, and the shepherd lay still, finally beginning to warm. I watched him closely, noticing how each breath grew just a little deeper than the last. It wasn't much, but it was something. After nearly an hour of rubbing and drying, he managed to open his eyes again. They met mine, and something passed between us, a sense of recognition, like he knew me, or needed me, maybe both. "You found the right place, didn't you?" I whispered. I moved to the kitchen again, this time heating up a bit of chicken broth. It wasn't much, but it was the best I could do without proper dog food. When I returned, his head had lifted slightly. Not much, but enough to track me as I approached. That spark in his eyes, it was still there. "Here, try this," I said softly, placing the bowl near his nose. He sniffed once, twice, then slowly began to lap it up. The sound of his tongue against the bowl made my heart clench. It meant he was fighting, still holding on. I sat down beside him and watched him drink, his body still trembling, but less violently now. As he finished, he rested his head on his front paws and looked up at me, calmer now. Whoever this dog was, he had come through something terrible. And deep down I knew this was just the beginning of the story. He wasn't just cold and starving. He was holding on to something. Something he couldn't tell me, but I could feel it in my gut. The hours crept by slowly, the storm outside refusing to let up. Snow slammed against the windows, piling higher with every gust of wind, and the forest disappeared behind a wall of white. But inside the cabin, things were starting to shift. The dog, still wrapped tightly in blankets, began to show signs of life. Small things. His tail twitched, his ears flicked toward sounds. His eyes followed my movements more steadily. I stayed by his side, rubbing his paws one at a time to restore circulation. He didn't resist. If anything, he leaned into the warmth. The trust he showed me, despite whatever horrors he'd endured, was humbling. He didn't have a collar, no tags, no signs of ownership. Just a lean frame and eyes filled with exhaustion and something else, a kind of haunted knowing. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" I whispered. He blinked slowly, as if confirming it. I tried not to let my mind spiral. Living off-grid, I didn't have immediate access to a vet or neighbors to help. It was just me and him. I could feel the weight of that responsibility, pressing down with every flicker of the fire. But I also felt something else, a strange sense of purpose. This dog hadn't ended up here by accident. I knew it in my bones. I made myself a quick cup of coffee and sat across from him, watching as his breathing grew steadier. He was curled up tightly but no longer rigid. The blankets around him were slowly drying out, and the warmth of the cabin was starting to do its job. As I sipped the coffee, something occurred to me. He must have come from somewhere nearby. The snow was still fresh, and while it had been falling hard, he hadn't been completely buried. That meant he hadn't been out there long, at least not in the storm. So where had he been before it? Had he run away? Been left behind? Or worse, dumped? I got up and double-checked the cabin's front door, securing the latch just in case. My gut told me he wasn't alone out there. The forest had a way of keeping secrets, and I was starting to suspect this storm had blown one of them right to my doorstep. As the fire crackled, I glanced down at the shepherd again. He had shifted slightly, his head now resting more comfortably. I leaned down to gently stroke his fur, whispering, "You're safe now. I promise." But just as the words left my mouth, a sound made me freeze. Scratch, scratch. From the door, again. The storm should have kept everything away, but something, or someone, was scratching at my door again. I stood completely still, my hand frozen midair over the shepherd's side. That sound, it wasn't the wind. It wasn't the creak of old wood or a branch brushing past the cabin. It was deliberate, rhythmic. Scratch, pause, scratch again. The shepherd's ears perked. His head lifted slightly, gaze locking on the door. A low sound escaped him. Not quite a growl, but not comfort either. He knew. Whatever was on the other side, it meant something. I moved slowly toward the entrance, my heart pounding against my ribs. The cabin felt colder all of a sudden, the air thicker. I stepped up to the door and listened closely. Nothing. Then, whine. It was softer this time, higher, not the same voice I'd heard before. My breath caught. There was another dog out there. With a trembling hand, I unlatched the door and pulled it open just enough to peek outside. A wave of cold air rushed in, bringing snow flurries with it. I blinked through the icy wind, adjusting my vision to the soft glow of early dawn. And there, just below the porch steps, was another German shepherd. Smaller, younger. Its coat was a tangled mess of frost and mud, its body hunched against the cold. It didn't bark or whimper, just stood there, staring up at me with wide, glassy eyes. "Oh no," I muttered, crouching low. "Where did you come from?" The dog didn't move at first, just trembled where it stood. But then it took one hesitant step forward, another. I could see the fear in its face, but more than that, I saw trust. It was the same look the first shepherd had given me the night before. I opened the door wider, beckoning it in. Come on, it's okay now. As soon as the warm air touched its face, the pup bolted up the steps and into the cabin, passing me like a gust of wind. The older shepherd by the fire lifted his head instantly, ears standing tall, his eyes locked onto the newcomer. And then, something incredible happened. The younger dog paused near the fire, inching forward with caution. The older one raised his head fully, and with the smallest wag of his tail, they locked eyes. Recognition bloomed in the room like sudden sunlight. "You know each other," I whispered. The pup let out a soft whine and curled up beside the older dog, resting its head gently against his chest. They weren't just two strays lost in a storm. They were family. Two freezing dogs, one storm, and now this undeniable connection that said they hadn't just wandered here, they'd survived something together. I stood there for a long moment, the cold air still swirling at my back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The younger shepherd, leaner, smaller, pressed its fragile body into the side of the older one, like it had finally found home. The older dog, though still weak, shifted enough to nuzzle the pup with his nose. A deep sigh left his chest. Not pain, not fear, relief. Whatever they'd endured out there in that storm, they'd made it here together. And that meant they'd come from the same place. I shut the door behind me, locking it tight against the wind. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from a growing awareness that this was no ordinary rescue. These dogs hadn't stumbled onto my cabin by luck. They had been driven here, and something told me they'd been running from something much worse than snow. I fetched another blanket and laid it over the pup, gently stroking its damp fur. "You're safe now," I said softly. "Both of you." The older shepherd gave me a slow blink, almost as if to acknowledge the words. He rested his head again, the younger dog still curled beside him like a shadow. I moved to the kitchen and poured the last of the warm broth into another bowl, this time for the newcomer. It took a little coaxing, but soon enough the pup began to lap it up hungrily, its body still trembling, but already more alive than when it had arrived. My cabin, once quiet and solitary, now buzzed with silent emotion. These two souls, scarred, exhausted, and alone, had found their way here for a reason, and now they were my responsibility. I sat back down in my chair, watching them both closely. Their bond was unmistakable. There was a sense of shared history between them, visible in the way they leaned into each other, in the way their breathing synced. Whatever they'd been through, they'd gotten through it together. The storm outside was finally beginning to weaken, but inside questions swirled like snow caught in a gust. Where had they come from? How far had they traveled? And what had they left behind? And then it hit me. If they had come from the forest, maybe someone else had too. Two dogs don't just show up in the dead of a blizzard unless they're escaping something. And I was about to find out exactly what. The storm outside had softened into a quiet snowfall, casting a pale, eerie light through the windows. The fire popped and hissed, the only real sound in the room beside the soft breaths of the two shepherds now sleeping beside each other. I couldn't rest, not with the weight of everything pressing on my mind. I kept glancing toward the door, feeling that old survival instinct prickling in the back of my mind. I knew this forest. I knew its silence. And something about it now felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to notice something I hadn't yet seen. After making sure the dogs were warm and settled, I laced up my boots, threw on my thick coat, and stepped outside. The cold hit like a slap, but I ignored it. The snow was fresh and deep, muffling every step I took. My eyes scanned the yard, and it didn't take long before I saw them. Tracks. Two sets of paw prints side by side, leading straight from the edge of the woods to my porch. But that wasn't all. There was a third trail, larger, deeper, boot prints. My breath caught. Someone had been with them. Someone had led them, or chased them, through the forest. The prints weren't old. They were partly filled with fresh snow, but still visible. Whoever it was had passed by just before the worst of the storm hit. My heart thudded as I followed the trail away from the cabin and into the trees. The farther I walked, the more the silence wrapped around me. No birds, no wind. Just the steady crunch of snow underfoot and the constant question gnawing at my brain. Who had these dogs been with? About 20 minutes in, the tracks veered off into a small clearing. The snow here was disturbed, chaotic. I crouched down, examining the pattern. There had been a struggle, scuff marks, paw prints circling tightly, and a deep impression where someone had fallen or maybe been forced down. I scanned the area, and that's when I saw it, half buried under a thin crust of snow. A leash. Frayed, torn, chewed. The dogs had been tied up here. My stomach twisted. They hadn't escaped the storm. They'd escaped captivity, and they'd done it together. Suddenly, the older shepherd's eyes made sense. The scars, the desperation, the urgency in his bark. They hadn't been wandering. They had been surviving. They weren't lost. They were running from someone, and the forest was about to show me just how dark their story really was. I stood in the clearing, staring at the torn leash in my hand, my breath forming clouds in the cold morning air. The snow-covered trees surrounded me like silent witnesses, towering and unmoved. Someone had been here. Someone had tied those dogs up, and for whatever reason, they'd been left behind in the storm. I scanned the tree line again, my pulse racing. Were they still out here, watching me, waiting? I didn't see anything at first, but then, just beyond the clearing, something caught my eye. Movement, a flash of tan against white. My heart leapt, but it wasn't a person. It was the older German shepherd. He had followed me. He stepped out of the trees, his coat blending with the snow, his eyes fixed on me. No leash, no fear, just focus. He barked once, loud and clear. A call, not a warning. "What is it, boy?" I called out, still kneeling by the leash. He barked again and turned, looking back toward the woods, then back at me. It was obvious. He wanted me to follow. My gut twisted. I hesitated for only a second, then stood and stepped into his path. We moved deeper into the trees, the snow crunching beneath our feet. Every now and then, he'd look back to make sure I was still behind him. His energy was different now, no longer weak or scared. It was like he'd found his strength again, his purpose. The trees closed in around us as the forest thickened. The sun was barely above the horizon, casting long shadows that reached like claws across the snow. And then, after several minutes of trudging forward, we reached it. A shed, old, weathered, sagging under the weight of snow. Its dark wood was nearly hidden beneath the frost, and the roof looked like it might cave in any second. But it was real, and it didn't belong to me or anyone I knew of. The shepherd stopped just a few feet away from it and barked again. His tail was stiff, his ears alert. He stared at the door, then back at me, waiting. I stepped forward slowly, dread creeping through my chest. I reached for the rusted handle, ice clinging to the metal like it didn't want to let go. I pulled. The door creaked open, revealing the kind of darkness that feels heavy, thick and stale with time and secrets. What I saw inside made my stomach drop. Inside that rotting shed was the truth, the kind you never expect to find, the kind that grabs you by the throat and never lets go. The stench hit first, a mix of rusted metal, mildew, and something harder to place. Not rot exactly, but something old, something used. The air was heavy, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years, yet clearly it had. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light slipping through the broken slats of the walls, I saw them. Cages, 4 of them, lined up against the far side of the shed. Empty now, but not clean. The floor of each was scattered with chewed blankets, cracked plastic bowls, and clumps of fur. My skin crawled as I stepped closer, heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't a storage shed, it was a prison. The shepherd stood in the doorway behind me, his body tense, ears pinned back. He let out a low, almost mournful whine. I turned back to the cages and ran my fingers over one of the bent bars. There were bite marks etched into the metal, scratches, desperate attempts to get out. I dropped to my knees in front of one of the cages and saw something else. blood. Faint, dried, but unmistakable. These dogs hadn't just been left here. They'd been tormented, and they'd fought to escape. "How long were you in here?" I asked the shepherd, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer, of course, but his silence said everything. In the corner of the room, I spotted a rickety table stacked with old tools, empty cans, and a weathered leather-bound notebook. It looked out of place, like someone had been keeping records. I picked it up, the cover brittle with age and cold. Flipping it open, I found lines scrawled in quick, sloppy handwriting. Dates, descriptions, codes. Each page listed information about a different dog: weight, size, condition, obedience potential. Then I found an entry that froze my blood. Subject number 12, male, GSD, strong temperament, obedient under pressure, high value. High value. The words made my stomach turn. These dogs weren't just trapped. They were inventory. I slammed the notebook shut, my hands shaking with a rising fury. Whoever had done this hadn't just abandoned the dogs. They'd used them, sold them, maybe even bred them in this freezing prison. And they were still out there. Suddenly the shepherd growled, his eyes locked on the tree line just beyond the shed. I turned, heart racing. There, between the trees, a figure, still, watching. He was standing there, watching us, and the second our eyes met, I knew. This wasn't over, not even close. The man stood just beyond the clearing, half shadowed by the tall pines, his presence cold and deliberate. I couldn't see his face clearly, but the way he stood, rooted and silent, sent a chill deeper than the wind ever could. The shepherd inched forward, growling low, his body tense like a coiled spring. Whoever that man was, Hero recognized him. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. Just the quiet crunch of snow under boots as the figure began walking toward us, slow and confident. My grip tightened around the notebook in my hand. The air felt heavy again, thicker, dangerous. Then finally he stepped into the light. A man in his late 40s, his face weathered and hard. A deep scar cut across his cheek, and his jaw was locked in a grim expression. His eyes flicked to the notebook, then back to me, narrowing. "That doesn't belong to you," he said flatly. "These dogs don't belong to you either," I fired back without hesitation, heart thudding in my chest. He smirked slightly, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know what you've stepped into." Hero let out a bark that shattered the tension like glass. He stepped in front of me, his body low and protective, a silent warning that needed no translation. The man's smirk faltered just enough for me to see the flicker of fear. He took one cautious step back. "What did you do to them?" I asked. "Why were they locked in cages? Why are there scars on his body?" His expression hardened again. "They were mine. I trained them, raised them. I can take them back." "You tortured them," I snapped. "You don't deserve to breathe the same air they do." For a moment, it looked like he might lunge forward, but Hero didn't flinch. He barked again, louder this time, his tail stiff, his eyes locked on the man like a soldier on duty. The man hesitated. Then he turned and bolted into the trees. "Hero!" I yelled instinctively, but he was already moving. The shepherd chased after him with surprising strength, vanishing into the woods. I took off after them, lungs burning as I followed the sound of snapping branches and angry barks. I didn't know what I would find, or if I could catch up in time, but I knew one thing. Hero wasn't running out of fear. He was protecting something, and he wasn't going to let this man disappear without a trace. Hero charged into those woods like he knew this was the end of something, and the beginning of everything else. The trees rushed past me as I ran, the cold slicing at my face, breath tearing from my lungs in ragged gasps. I followed the sound of Hero's barking, sharp, echoing, relentless. Then suddenly silence. No movement, no sound, just the forest, frozen in place. I slowed, heart pounding, scanning the dense brush for any sign of them. And then, there he was. Hero stood in the middle of a clearing, tail stiff, ears perked, body still. A few feet away, the man crouched on the ground, hands raised slightly in fear. Hero didn't growl, didn't advance. He just stood his ground, guarding the space between us, a protector to the end. I stepped forward, voice shaking but steady. You're done. I've got your log. I've seen the cages. The authorities are already on their way. The man's face twisted, not in fear, but in defeat. He looked at Hero with something close to hate. He was mine, he muttered. You took what was mine. No, I said firmly. He was never yours. You broke him, and he still had more loyalty than you'll ever understand. Hero barked once more, as if to punctuate the truth. I didn't need to restrain the man. He knew the game was over. As I called the sheriff again, giving them my exact location, Hero came to my side and pressed against my leg. His body was warm, strong, alive. Back at the cabin, the younger pup was still curled beside the fire, unaware that everything was about to change. When Hero walked through the door beside me, the pup rushed forward, tail wagging wildly. The reunion, this time free of fear, was almost too much to bear. The authorities came quickly. They took statements, took the man, took the notebook. They promised to investigate the property, to dig into records and find out how far this network went. I knew it would take time, but the truth was out. Hero had made sure of it. In the days that followed, the storm passed, and the snow began to melt. The forest returned to silence. The cabin, once just my solitude, became a home again, not just for me, but for them. I named the younger pup Scout. She never left Hero's side. And Hero? He became something more than a companion. He was a survivor, a protector, and the bravest soul I'd ever met. His scars didn't define him. They told the story of how he'd made it out, how he'd saved someone who didn't even know they needed saving. We moved forward together, me, Hero, and Scout. The past still haunted our steps, but every sunrise brought something new: hope, healing, and the reminder that second chances exist. If you believe in the strength of animals like Hero, their loyalty, their resilience, their power to protect even after they've been broken, then share this story. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more true, powerful rescues just like this one. Because Hero's story isn't the only one that matters. There are thousands more waiting to be heard.